Now, as you know, most of you probably know, Lakefield has been called the cradle of Canadian literature.
That's been cleaned.
Wow. Oh yes, I see that now. Yeah.
Because you can't read them anymore.
Exactly.
I was buried in this graveyard right here. So now, as you look north of here, way north, you're, where beyond the marina there, you're looking at the waterfront section of where the land that he settled on. Okay, and it was all wilderness here at the time. So yeah, and he made a go of it. It really did. So that's Samuel. And and she had actually published many stories and articles about nature prior to her marriage to Thomas Traill in 1831, and then their arrival here roughly about a year later. Now he was a former British military officer, and they were kind of let go after the wars in Europe, and he was on half pay and entitled to free land here in the Canadas, courtesy of the British Crown, which was very nice. When Catharine and her husband disembarked at the port of entry, Coburg was a port of entry then for the backcountry, they came straight in up here into what was then known as the backcountry, with the intention of connecting with her brother, who was, settling here on this property. And there was money coming in, and she and John started the Victoria magazine in Belleville, and she serialized various articles that she wrote that had to do with her life in Doro Township in the bush, and these eventually became part of her famous book, Roughing It in the Bush. However, during the 70s, she came here for extended visits with Catharine, who was already back here living in this nice house here. And we can well imagine that they must have spent, this was in the 1870s, so they must have spent many a long afternoon, in the rocking chairs on the porch, reminiscing about their challenging and adventurous lives here and their extended families. They both had really large extended families, and of course their successes and failures as writers, and how much had changed in the land and in the country, and within themselves, which is another whole aspect of this story, how much had changed within themselves during those years. And then 2 years later, Thomas Traill died, and with what little money she had left, and with help from faithful Samuel, what a good brother he was, she was able to, and some of her daughters, who were doing quite well, she was able to purchase this house, which was then a recently built cottage, which at that time had an uninterrupted view of the river. It was no canal, it was just a river. And here she lived until her death and continued to write, and gave this country two remarkable books, which are based on her knowledge and observation of the natural world. The first was Canadian Wildflowers, which contained really detailed and very beautiful illustrations done by Susanna's daughter Agnes, who was a gifted artist. And it was sold by subscription, 500, and they just went like hotcakes. That was followed a few years later by what some people refer to as the culmination of her study and love of native Canadian flowers and fauna, studies in plant life of Canada. Going back across, we go back up those steps, we're going to cross the bridge, if you want to go that way, and we're going to go to the lights on Queen Street, cross over, and make our way up to where Isabella Valancy Crawford lived and Margaret Laurance. We were staying in a small hotel in transit north of Kingston. Providence played a part in Isabella's development, her future, and her development as a writer. Quite extraordinary. It so happened that Robert Strickland, one of the many sons of Samuel, and his brother were in the region at the time on behalf of the Canada Company, which his father had worked for in the Guelph area many years before. And he happened to meet the Crawfords at the hotel, the small little village hotel north of Kingston, and he sensed that they were in a bit of dire straits and in need of some help. And he knew that Lakefield at that time needed a doctor, so he suggested they should move here. And this was a perfect marriage circumstances. And to entice them to do so, he offered them the free use of time before the Crawfords made the acquaintance of other members of the extended Strickland clan, which they did, particularly Catharine Parr Traill, who had come back to live in that house we just saw and was riding away, busy as a bee. And we know from Catharine's letters that she visited with the Crawfords, the young Isabella, and Isabella was quite talented and vivacious and so forth. And she might have helped her in her early years at writing. We don't know for sure. There's no written evidence of that, but it's quite possible that that happened. When Robert Strickland returned home from business in the Eastern Townships, moved back into Redden Hall, the family moved here sometime in 1862. This house looked very different then than it does now. And there's no doubt that that Lakefield and its environs played a major influence on her development. She developed and she lived here till she was 19. So she was a young woman when she left here, already quite experienced. And she developed an evocative symbolic language derived from elements of the natural world and her observation and her awareness of native lore and native lifestyle, which she was surrounded by here. And she used this in her more mature work, her poetry and her stories later on. These elements gave them a kind of a mythic dimension. By the way, her work was highly praised in England and even in the States, in New York, Variety magazine. And one reviewer in England said about her major poetry is kind of they are long narrative poems, Spooks Is Past, Malcolm's Katie, that they had the mark of genius. So she was highly thought of in certain circles. Her remains are buried in Peterborough Little Lake Cemetery. There's a high Celtic cross that was raised by supporters later, and it has the inscription, Isabella Valancy Crawford, poet by the gift of God. So, that's Isabella. So we're going up to Margaret's novel, as Margaret herself was, and divining, always looking for, the liberation, personal liberation, freedom, love, and so forth. And this theme, runs throughout the course of her novels. From The Stone Angel to right through to The Diviners. The river, she saw this phenomenon. The river is going south, but the wind blows, it's going the other way. How does that happen? And so it's a wonderful symbol of trying to find unity in out of duality. The most autobiographical of all her novels, most autobiographically sourced of all her novels. And she's helped by, this wonderful old man Royland, the diviner. So she's done her own divining, and she finishes, at the end of the novel, she finishes her book. She's writing a novel throughout the course of this story. We may have a chance to carry on a little bit about Margaret if you want to ask questions. We're going back to the museum here, just around the corner. Take any questions, share any comments, and if they don't throw us out, we'll get a chance to share a few brief readings of the books of these writers. Okay? So we just go this way.
Yeah.